Her husband split her into 9 parts. This story will haunt you forever. Today, we're delving into another chilling true crime story. If you find these investigations intriguing, please support my channel by subscribing and activating notifications. Statistically, 1 in every 7 crimes globally occurs within families, with over 38% perpetrated by men. Alarmingly, domestic violence is most rampant in developed nations. A staggering 50% of women who suffer violent deaths are murdered by their husbands or partners, underscoring the urgent need to shield women from domestic crimes. But why do some women's quest for a protective partner lead them directly into the clutches of a predator? Perhaps it's because societal and familial pressures instill the belief that a woman must have a man by her side, a notion ingrained from a young age. Tragically, this can sometimes culminate in enduring violence, as was the case in 2012 with Ekaterina Karaglanova. At just 26 years old, she was brutally murdered, and shockingly, her killer has since been released from prison and returned to Izhevsk. Izhevsk, a significant industrial hub in the Russian Federation, serves as the scientific, educational, and cultural center of the Volga region. Nestled west of the Ural Mountains, this capital of Udmurtia is famed for its weapons manufacturing and engineering prowess. Visitors can marvel at the city's distinctive architecture, immerse themselves in Udmurt culture, and explore the renowned Izhmash Museum. Back in her hometown, Ekaterina's life was fraught with challenges. Following a difficult divorce, she found herself with no prospects and single-handedly raising a young child. Despite feeling drained and defeated, she resolved to turn a new page. Moving with her daughter from Naberezhnya Chelny to Izhevsk infused new vibrancy into her life. She quickly made her mark in the beauty industry, found a job she loved, and even harbored ambitions to open her own salon. While her professional life flourished, Ekaterina's personal life remained fragmented. Despite her stunning appearance and the continual interest from men, she was cautious and slow to trust. Shunning the dating scene, she focused her energy on her career until Alexei Tatarkin entered her life. Their paths first crossed in 2007 when Alexei was working as a taxi driver. Katya's attention was a significant ego boost for Alexei, prompting him to dial up his charm. He portrayed his taxi driving as merely a sideline, claiming his main occupation was a system administrator for several prominent firms, backed by degrees in both system administration and economics. By this time, Ekaterina was financially independent, not needing support, but his educational background and apparent ambition caught her interest. Their relationship remained platonic initially. However, when her ex-husband required a system administrator for his business, Ekaterina immediately thought of Alexei. Upon securing the job, Alexei became increasingly intertwined in her life, from driving her and her child to daycare to handling computer issues and even walking her dog. He also accompanied her on visits to her parents in Naberezhnya Chelny. Despite all his efforts, Katya perceived his actions as merely friendly gestures. Realizing this, Alexei shifted his strategy to tug at her heartstrings. One day, he orchestrated a dramatic scene outside Ekaterina's workplace. Tearfully, he confessed that he had caught his wife cheating and was devastated to learn from her aunt that the children he believed were his were not. Although the spectacle seemed somewhat exaggerated, it stirred Ekaterina's sympathy. Alexei continued to exploit her empathy, spinning tales of his supposed military service in Chechnya, a head injury sustained there, and his regular attendance at the funerals of fallen comrades. These stories of his struggles resonated deeply with Ekaterina, compelling her to support him. His narrative culminated when he claimed to travel to Moscow for surgery to extract a bullet allegedly lodged in his skull. From the train station, he phoned her, claiming to have fainted and been robbed of his money and documents. Moved by his plight, Ekaterina rushed to his aid, brought him to her home, and nursed him for a week. This marked the beginning of their romantic relationship. Tragically, Ekaterina was blinded by affection, unaware that most of what Alexei told her was fabricated. Relationships founded on deception seldom prosper. And this truth manifested early in Ekaterina and Alexei's relationship. In one unsettling incident, Alexei withdrew the last 1,000 rubles from Ekaterina's purse to buy her roses, heedless of leaving her without funds for basic necessities for herself and her daughter. As their relationship progressed, Alexei began to press for a deeper commitment, persuading Katya to consider moving in together. After relentless persuasion, she relented. Unexpectedly, Alexei escalated things further by proposing marriage. He applied to the registry office 3 times, each time met with refusal from Ekaterina. Undeterred, he resorted to dramatic gestures, twisting his arms in despair and threatening to end his life if she declined again. Overwhelmed by his persistence and emotional manipulation, Ekaterina conceded, and they were officially married on August 3, 2011. From the outset, Ekaterina's mother harbored a strong dislike for Alexei, perceiving him as unreliable and unsuitable for her daughter. She frequently expressed her concerns, urging him not to pressure Katya into marriage before she was ready. However, her advice went unheeded, culminating in a resigned phone call from Ekaterina. "Mom, I don't know how to say this. We got married." She attempted to inject humor into the situation, joking that perhaps a second divorce might not be as daunting as the first. Their marital life was fraught with contention, particularly over financial issues. Mere months after the wedding, Alexei intrusively began managing Ekaterina's business affairs. He sold the Kamaz truck she had acquired from her previous marriage's property division, using the proceeds for a trip to Moscow, where they purchased 3 used foreign cars to refurbish and resell. However, they only succeeded in selling 2 of the cars, with the proceeds from the third mysteriously disappearing. Alexei claimed to have been scammed, but Ekaterina's patience had worn thin. She demanded restitution, either in cash or a car of equivalent value. Under pressure, Alexei issued her a promissory note for 400,000 rubles, which Katya, mistrustful of his intentions, gave to her mother for safekeeping. Ekaterina's commitment to her family's well-being was undeniable. She maintained an exhaustive schedule, often attending to 10 to 12 clients daily and working until 1 a.m. Her responsibilities included paying off a car loan, covering daycare fees, purchasing clothing for herself, her daughter, and her new husband, as well as footing the bill for gas, car parts, her advanced training courses, and other everyday expenses. However, any attempt by Katya to discuss financial matters with Alexei was met with intense jealousy and unfounded accusations of leading an inappropriate lifestyle. She confided in her friends and her mother about her intention to divorce, acknowledging that the marriage had been an error. Despite her resolve, extracting Alexei from her apartment proved nearly impossible. By mid-February 2012, they separated, but the disputes persisted. Soon after, Ekaterina initiated divorce proceedings, and just days later, she vanished. On May 27, 2012, Ekaterina Karaglanova, a renowned beauty expert in Izhevsk, was reported missing. The following day, concerned by her daughter's uncharacteristic silence, Ekaterina's mother reluctantly contacted Alexei. Despite her aversion to him, the situation was desperate. Ekaterina had not answered her phone since the previous night and had failed to return calls, an unprecedented occurrence. Alexei feigned ignorance about Katya's whereabouts but promised to inspect her apartment. Skeptical of Alexei's account, her mother quickly obtained the contact of one of Ekaterina's friends from Naberezhnye Chelny. From there, she made calls to local morgues and hospitals and lodged a missing person report with the police. Upon receiving the distressing news, she immediately traveled to Izhevsk. Upon arrival, she found her daughter's apartment locked and her car untouched in the courtyard. This marked the beginning of one of the largest search operations in the city's history. Katya's friends collaborated to reconstruct the events of the day she disappeared, pinpointing around 2 p.m. as the critical hour. Ekaterina was last seen in a cafe, seated with an unidentified man, according to a waitress's account. Later, security footage from her building captured her arriving at approximately 3:40 p.m. She parked her car in the courtyard and entered her apartment. From that moment, the circumstances of her whereabouts became a haunting enigma. Her car remained parked, but Ekaterina vanished without a trace. Her mother, Olga, attempted to contact her around 6 p.m. The phone rang but went unanswered. By 11 p.m., Ekaterina's phone was switched off, cutting off all communication. Her family and friends were adamant that she would never leave town unannounced, not even for a brief trip. On May 30th, 2012, the investigative department of the Pervomaisky district in Izhevsk, operating under the investigative committee of the Russian Federation for the Udmurt Republic, initiated a criminal investigation into her disappearance under Part 1 of Article 105 of the Russian Criminal Code. The case swiftly came under special scrutiny by the investigative committee. Despite continuous searches extending over a month, there was no sign of Ekaterina. The city of Izhevsk rallied together. Posters bearing her image were ubiquitous. Her friends, desperate for any lead, even consulted psychics. Volunteers from all walks of her life, friends, acquaintances, and clients joined forces with law enforcement to scour the suburbs and various city sectors based on witness tips, yet no credible leads emerged. Frustrated by the lack of progress, Olga Gorova escalated her pleas for intervention, filing complaints with every conceivable authority in Udmurtia, the republic's prosecutor, and even appealing directly to President Vladimir Putin. Although her efforts were acknowledged and her correspondence registered, it was only after her persistent appeals that investigative vigor seemed to rekindle. Alexei, Ekaterina's husband, emerged as a prime suspect amid the mystery. Known for his extreme jealousy and suspected by Ekaterina of orchestrating the disappearance of her documents amidst their divorce proceedings, his involvement was highly suspected. However, he maintained his innocence, asserting his ignorance about her whereabouts. Shortly after her disappearance, Alexei was detained for questioning but was subsequently released without charges. As the investigation deepened, Alexei Tatarkin withdrew from public life, turning off his phone and severing communication with the outside world. Proving his involvement in Ekaterina's disappearance proved challenging until a crucial breakthrough occurred. A waitress, who had withdrawn money from Katya's card at Alexei's behest, saw the missing person posters a few days later and contacted Katya's mother, triggering a cascade of events. Further testimony from a neighbor added to the mounting evidence. They reported hearing a scream from Katya's apartment on the day of her disappearance. Additional witnesses observed Alexei driving Ekaterina's car that same day. When the police seized the vehicle, they discovered traces of Ekaterina's blood inside, an ominous clue pointing to foul play. Forensic results confirmed the presence of blood in early July, and by July 10th, Alexei was arrested. Throughout the interrogations, he vehemently denied any wrongdoing. He even feigned illness during questioning, leading to moments where Yevgeny Fedorov, the lead investigator for high-priority cases with the Investigative Committee of the Russian Federation for Udmurtia, had to summon medical assistance. However, medical evaluations found no evidence of the minor stroke Alexei claimed to have suffered. The situation took a dramatic turn on July 12th during another round of questioning, when Alexei unexpectedly confessed to the murder. He claimed he was driven to confess by nightmares where Ekaterina haunted him, speaking to him and driving him to madness. His admission came just before what would have been her 27th birthday, a grim revelation that only added to the tragedy. Despite his confession, Alexei continued to obfuscate the details of the crime. He initially claimed to have committed the murder by the banks of the Kama River, but later he professed uncertainty about the location of her remains, further complicating the investigation. In the backdrop of these grim developments, the last known person to see Katya alive was Alina, one of her students. They had met at a cafe around 2 or 3 p.m. on May 27th. Alina recalled, "She wanted to hire me. We had just started discussing her plans to open a beauty salon when Katya's phone rang. It seems someone had posted her personal messages online. She tried to check the internet on her phone but couldn't access anything." According to a witness, Katya mentioned she was heading home and would return in about 30 minutes, asking her to wait. On her way, Katya called her husband. Amid their ongoing divorce proceedings, she suspected he was behind the leak of her personal messages, given his technical prowess. She confronted him at their former shared address on Udmurtskaya Street, where she had been living since their separation. Alexei Tatarkin recounted that their meeting in the building's entryway escalated into a heated argument almost instantly. Katya accused him of disseminating her private conversations with another man. In retaliation, Alexei admitted to investigators that he questioned her about rumored affairs. "Her insinuations were clear. She mocked my ignorance of her actions," Alexei disclosed. In a moment of uncontrolled rage, he confessed to grabbing a knife and stabbing Katya in the chest. Katya collapsed, and in a state of shock, Alexei held her as she lay dying on his knees. He described a haunting 10 minutes during which he watched the life fade from her eyes. Once he realized what he had done, panic set in. To conceal his crime, he gruesomely dismembered her body. A neighbor reported a chilling scream that lasted around 5 minutes during the incident, sounding muffled at intervals as if someone was stifling her cries. This was followed by the sound of running water for several hours, suggesting a methodical cleanup. Alexei's actions post-murder were cold and calculated, far from the impulsive outburst of violence he claimed. He made no attempt to seek emergency help. Instead, he methodically dismembered Ekaterina's body, dividing it into 9 pieces, and stuffed the remains into garbage bags. He then manipulated her digital presence to mislead her contacts and the authorities. He sent texts from Katya's phone to his own, one indicating she was out for a drive and another promising a call the next day. Utilizing her laptop, he sent messages posing as her, further muddying the investigative waters. Around 9 p.m., he discreetly transported the bags to a car he had in his possession for repairs, planning to dispose of the gruesome evidence under the cover of darkness. After committing the gruesome act, Alexei Tatarkin disposed of the remains in 2 locations. He buried some near the village of Chultum and discarded the rest in a landfill in the Zavyalovsky district near the village of Volzhoy. Following this, he returned home and resumed his life, observing as the city was engulfed in the search for Ekaterina, whose fate he had already sealed. The official funeral for Ekaterina Gurova was held on July 17, 2012. She was interred in a closed casket. The ceremony began with a memorial service in Izhevsk, followed by her coffin being transported to Naberezhnye Chelny for burial next to her father's grave. The funeral attracted many of Valery Gurov's former colleagues, an esteemed anesthesiologist who had passed away in October 2008 at 45 due to cancer, to pay their respects and reminisce about how dearly he had loved his Katyunya. Ekaterina left behind a 6-year-old daughter, Nastya. The timing of Alexei's confession, a month and a half after the crime, raised suspicions. Katya's mother, Olga Gurova, speculated that his admission was strategically delayed to ensure the remains would be too decomposed to reveal precise details of the murder, such as the number of wounds or the exact nature of the attack. Online resources about the decomposition rates of human bodies suggest that Alexei might have calculated his confession to minimize evidence of his brutality. The underlying motives for the crime also merit examination. While jealousy appears to be a catalyst, financial disputes were a recurrent theme in their tumultuous relationship. Olga pointed out that Katya used to give Alexei money for the car loan payments. However, starting in May 2011, these payments mysteriously ceased, even though Alexei repeatedly assured Katya that he would settle the debt soon. Despite his claims during the investigation that he had been making the payments from his own funds and had handed all receipts to Katya, the truth surfaced in November 2011 when a collection agency, having bought the debt from the bank, contacted a number that turned out to be Alexei's. Alexei exploited a fabricated narrative to defer financial obligations, telling the loan agency that his wife had been in a severe car accident and was hospitalized, unable to communicate, but reassured them that payments would resume soon. He prolonged this deception until May 2012. After Ekaterina's death, he claimed it was he who was now hospitalized, attributing further delays to his supposed condition. Monetary disputes were a persistent source of discord in their marriage, exacerbated by Alexei's erratic financial contributions and dubious business expenses. The contrast between Ekaterina and Alexei was stark. She was open and sincere, whereas he was manipulative and avaricious, not to mention profoundly jealous. This jealousy had some grounding as evidenced during the trial, where Alexei's friends testified that he had enlisted them to surveil Ekaterina, catching her in a seemingly flirtatious interaction with another man. His skills as a system administrator allowed him to covertly monitor her online interactions, further stoking his obsessive jealousy. Alexei's portrayal of concern for Ekaterina was merely a facade, as investigations later revealed his instability and deceit regarding his personal history. Contrary to his claims, he had neither completed any college education nor served in the military, specifically in Chechnya. The case against Alexei was extensive, compiled into 7 voluminous files that included dozens of witness testimonies, multiple forensic analyses, and detailed records of investigative proceedings. Ekaterina Gurova vanished on the night of May 27th, triggering a vast search effort involving her family, law enforcement, and volunteers who scoured forests, basements, and derelict structures for any sign of her. The court records painted a picture of a tumultuous relationship, with Alexei frequently instigating arguments. Prior to their marriage, Ekaterina had even attempted to call off their engagement, which had led Alexei to attempt suicide. By February 2012, she had left him, choosing to live separately. Alexei later feigned a stroke in early May, adding further layers of manipulation. Their divorce was scheduled for June 6, 2012. Despite her better judgment, Ekaterina had entrusted Alexei with managing the payments for her car loan. From his chilling confession, "I placed Ekaterina's remains in trash bags, loaded them into my Viaz 21053, and drove to the village of Nechkino. There, I attempted to dispose of the bags in the river, but they refused to sink." Alexei Tatarkin's attempts to sink the torso by tying it to bricks were unsuccessful as the bindings came loose. Frustrated, he drove back toward Izhevsk. Upon returning to the apartment, he meticulously cleaned the floors and wiped away any traces of blood. Gathering the blood-stained items along with the remaining body parts, he loaded everything back into his car. During this grim cleanup, a message from one of Ekaterina's friends appeared on her laptop. Impersonating Ekaterina, he responded, claiming she had gone out of town for a drive. To further construct his alibi, Alexei sent 2 text messages from her phone to his own, indicating that she asked him not to worry and promised to call back the next day. Alexei later testified that he abandoned the torso in a wooded area off the road, merely covering it with leaves without burying it. He spaced the remaining bags about 30 yards apart and discarded the sweater he wore during the crime at the same site. He then drove onto the Staropolsky Highway toward Zavyalovo, and after reaching the sign for Stary Choltum, he turned right and buried the rest of the body parts along with the clothes. During the court proceedings, as witness statements were read, Ekaterina's mother, Olga, was visibly distressed. Overcome with grief, she had to exit to the hallway where paramedics attended to her. The judge spent nearly an hour and a half reading the verdict, ultimately sentencing Alexei Tatarkin to 9 years and 6 months in a maximum security penal colony, slightly less than the 10 years the prosecutor had requested. The sentencing proceeded without an appeal. Neither Ekaterina's family lawyer nor her mother attended, and none of Alexei's relatives were present. Attached to the criminal case was a claim for damages filed by Ekaterina's mother, requesting 5 million rubles for emotional distress and 30,000 rubles for funeral expenses. The court granted the reimbursement for the funeral costs, but advised that the claim for emotional damages be pursued through a separate civil lawsuit. As the verdict was read, Alexei's expression remained stoic, his only relief being that the haunting dreams of Ekaterina, which had tormented him, had ceased. It's profoundly saddening to reflect on the life of a wonderful woman like Ekaterina, who tragically never escaped the clutches of the man she married. With her inherently kind and hopeful nature, Ekaterina could see light in the darkest places, yet she was blind to the malevolence lurking within Alexei. Perhaps this tragedy stems from societal pressures where, from a young age, women are taught that their lives are incomplete without a man by their side, fostering a type of self-esteem that too readily accepts any suitor. How undervalued must Ekaterina have felt to tolerate a man who couldn't even afford to buy her flowers without stealing from her purse? Why do we, as women, often fail to see through such deceit? Katya recognized early that he was a charlatan, not a true partner. A genuine loving partner would cherish and protect his woman, delighting in her happiness even with the smallest gestures just to see her smile. Yet, by the time she realized the truth, Ekaterina was tragically ensnared in a trap from which she could not escape alive. In a bitter twist of fate, Alexei Tatarkin was released and returned to Izhevsk in 2022, a grim reminder of the imperfections of justice. However, we are not the ones who draft the laws or set the penalties. What we can do is learn from such harrowing stories. That this case should act as a cautionary tale to beautiful, successful women, those who are confident in themselves and believe in the inherent goodness of others, warning them against those who might appear as devoted partners but are merely biding their time. You might entrust him with everything, your children, your assets, believing in his loyalty, yet such a man may betray you because he cannot bear the weight of your success, which gnaws at his ego slowly, inevitably. True justice may be divine and delayed, but it is inexorable. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more eye-opening stories like this one.